Hi and welcome to another episode of the Page One Podcast. I'm Marco.
I'm Tarek.
If you're just joining us for the first time at the Page One Podcast, we'd like to speak to writers of all kinds about their writing process and how they broke into the industry and just explore their work.
Yeah, it's all about really how writers write and the tips that they can give to everyone out there listening to make everyone a better writer.
Yeah, really we started this because we want to steal all these ideas for ourselves, but we thought we should share them with you guys as well.
It's less obvious if we share it with other people.
Yeah, exactly. This week we've got Abby-Lynn Knorr, who's a young adult author, also entirely self-published.
Yeah, 19 books in 3 years she's put out, which is a hefty. I mean, I can barely write one book in 3 years now.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's right. And she's made a massive success of it, actually.
Yeah. And I think if any listeners out there are going down the Kindle Unlimited route, thinking of doing it yourself, you'll get a lot out of this episode today.
Yeah, definitely. It's unusual in the sense that we've spoken to a lot of traditionally published authors, but Abby's chosen to completely shun the traditional publishing, actually. It's a deliberate decision on her part, and she's made a massive success of it. So we talked to her about that, about how to market a self-publishing book, and also about her writing process. She's got a bit of an unusual process as well. She doesn't always write in a linear manner. But we talked to her about that and more, so we hope you enjoyed the chat. So you always enjoyed writing since you were a kid?
Yeah, I always have. I've written for as long as I can remember. My mom taught me to read when I was 3. And my dad teases me that I could read better then than I can now because I used to read out loud to them.
Right.
And I could pronounce all these like big words that I had no idea what they meant. And I have always loved story, and I loved it in all its forms, whether it was movies or plays or books or anything really. I loved it all. And I always wanted to be a writer, but I never really thought it was possible. I just thought it would be a really big uphill battle, and I'd have to jump through all these hoops. And when I finally got through those hoops, I'd have no money in the end of it. Be the kind of traditional suffering writer. So I always nursed the dream, and I kind of like tented it in my dark hours and wrote in the closet, so to speak. While I was doing this other career, I had a marketing career in
How long did you do that for?
I did that for 8 years.
Wow.
Previous to that, I was working at a magazine when I was in my 20s, and I was trained as a dancer. And so I did that a little bit. But always just writing, I always read a ton, and I always wrote just for the joy of it, and to think that maybe one day I would finish a book. And if I finished that book, then, and somebody read it and enjoyed it, that would be, a huge thing for me.
Yeah.
And so when I did marketing, I worked for a bath and body company in a small town in the Rockies in Alberta. And I worked for this married couple, wonderful entrepreneurs, and they taught me so much while I worked with them that even to this day, I know that if I hadn't done that stint of 8 years doing this marketing work, I wouldn't be nearly as successful today at my author business as I am. So I have a lot. I feel like I went through university kind of.
Yeah.
And when I started listening to podcasts, I was looking for, I was looking to start my own company. I became kind of entrepreneurial through this experience. And I knew that I loved storytelling, but I still didn't know, this was in 2016. I still had no idea that self-publishing was really a thing that you could, be successful at. Mm-hmm. I kind of had the old mindset where it's like, if it's not trad, then it doesn't count. And it's probably bad anyway. There's a reason that you're not publishing. So I had all those old ideas, and I started listening to podcasts. And one of the podcasts was called Smart Passive Income, and on it was a guest talking about Michelangelo, and he had such an interesting story that I started doing a bit of research about Michelangelo, and I was absolutely blown away by what he had done with his Vampires in Space series, because that's the one he started with. And I was like, vampires in space? Really? Wow. That's amazing. There's like people really hungry for this stuff. And I started reading some of his work and I really enjoyed it. And that led me to branch out and read more indie authors, and just kind of, I became this starving for information person that just, I consumed everything I could find on indie publishing. And I was amazed by some of the stories that I heard, the success stories. And in a very short period of time, I went from, I don't really know what I'm going to do, to this is what I have to do. Because it just brought my old dreams to the forefront and set them on fire. And I was like, I can do this. I'm capable of doing this. I can tell a story. At least I think I can. And I have this marketing background. With the two combined, I feel like I can make a go of it. So. And
did you have stuff that you'd worked on that you wanted to publish then, or did you sort of start from scratch at that point?
I did have work that I had kind of produced over the years, but it wasn't what I ended up publishing. That work is kind of stuffed back in its box, and it's a kind of a post-apocalyptic dystopian story. And I ended up going towards a more urban fantasy genre, because I grew up loving everything to do with oceans and maritime history, nautical history, shipwreck stories, pirate stories. I wanted to be a mermaid when I was young. I thought just everything to do with the underwater world. I loved it. And I always had these fantasies when I was a kid that if you were a mermaid, it's not even about being a mermaid. It's more about the ability to breathe underwater, unencumbered by all of the equipment and everything that you need as a human being to survive down there, and explore what's under there, because there's ancient cities and, millions of shipwrecks, literally from all different eras. And there's amazing natural wonders. And so I fed that dream and started writing a mermaid story. And that story took me about 9 months to write. And I had let my freelance contracts, because at that time I was doing freelance work, I let those contracts expire because I knew that if I was splitting my time, I wouldn't be able to produce as fast as I wanted to. So some people are able to juggle family and full-time job and writing, and I just bow to those people. I wasn't able to do that. I was lucky in a way because I had no partner, I had no pets, I had no plants to keep alive even. I could just focus on what I wanted to do. And I was living up in northern Italy in a friend's villa. She had 2 apartments in her villa, and she just invited me. She's like, well, don't go back to Canada, because I was in Italy when all this was happening. Don't go back to Canada and get a job. Just come up here and live with me and write your books. And I was like, I'd be silly to say no to that. So
where in Italy was it?
It was in the Alto Adige region in the north, in Trentino. So it was a beautiful valley with mountain biking and apple orchards everywhere, and skiing and hiking. And it was wonderful. And the family I was staying with was wonderful. And I wrote my first 3 books in their home, basically.
Good for inspiration, that area, I would say.
Yeah, it was so inspiring.
Yeah.
And I was able to, kind of maintain my health, because writers, you guys will know, suffer from sitting in front of the computer for too many hours of the day, and then your body starts to hurt, and you're fighting this like, I'm on a roll, I don't want to stop, but I really need to go and just get some fresh air, otherwise I'm going to become this like weird creature that never leaves the house.
And so did you kind of skipped over the whole agent stuff then? Did you even try with that, or did you say, no, this is that, I don't want to go down that path at all? Yeah,
it's weird. I actually didn't even try. I thought, because I kind of, after all this research that I did, I went through this big mental shift where I realized that people were doing this professionally. They were making a living at it, and they were producing high quality work. And if you had the skills and you wanted to do the marketing aspect of it, and I did have those skills, luckily, then why go through the delay, like the long process of trying to find an agent, which could take 2 years, that agent trying to sell your work, which could take 2 years. And then once it's on a roster, it could take another 2 years just to get it published. Yep. Your royalties were a lot smaller, and there's no guarantee they'd publish book 2 or even give you a big marketing budget. So I just kind of said, you know what, I'm going to do this on my own. And maybe, if I ever change my mind and want to pursue trad, then at least I can bring a readership with me.
Yeah. Yeah. And how was it how did you find it when you first launched the book then?
I was so blown away by the response that my books got. I wrote 3 books before I published anything. And because I basically didn't do anything but write for a full year. And because I had to figure out my process, everyone's process is different. And I didn't know what I was doing. And I more than once got into trouble with a story and had to tear the whole thing apart and, reorganize it. And I had to think about, this is going to be a series. How does the series work? Because it's a non-linear series. I didn't write book 1 that would lead into book 2, book 3, book 4. I wrote 5 books that you could read as a book 1, each one. So it was a totally different setup than kind of what's normal.
Is this the Elementals series?
So you can actually enter that series at any point through books 1 to 5, and you should read book 6 last. But it gave me a way of giving something fresh to send traffic to, and it didn't matter if they'd read book 1 or not. So I could cycle through promotions with those 5 books while I was producing the last book.
Just to focus on that, just in case people don't know, but
Sure.
The story is it's these 5 friends basically that have an amazing summer. Essentially, they all go somewhere else, and they all end up with these powers. Is that right? And in each book there's references to what's happening to the others.
Exactly.
But like you say, you can pick up any one first and just get.
That's right. You get to know the other characters through the girls texting their friends, and you kind of get hints that something is happening with the other girl, but you don't know what that is. You just get these little hints. And so the idea is that, as you're reading the story of Born of Fire, you're getting some ideas of what's happening with Water and Earth. And once you've read one and you start to read the others, you're like, oh, I know what's happening with that character. And you kind of get let in on the secret the more you read.
Yeah.
So how do you, how do you plan something like that? How do you make sure all those 5 books sync up? Or do you leave so much of it open that you say, well, whatever that is, I can write that later on and it won't matter because it'll fit in?
Yeah, there's definitely an element of being a bit cryptic and vague when you're initially writing the story, but you can always go back once you know what is happening with those others. Because I wrote the first 3 books not knowing the plots of the next 3 books, just having a very rough idea. And so I kept it open, but I also dropped little hints of things that I knew I wanted to use. So there was enough there that the reader was getting an ideas. And obviously they knew that I was going to cover all 5 of the elements. And so they had, rough ideas of what that was going to be like.
In that process where you've decided, right, I'm going to self-publish these, and did you drop all 3 books at once, or did you space them out?
I didn't, but close. I did kind of a rapid release. So I launched my first book in December of 2016, and book 2 was out, I think, about a month later. And then book 3 was about, I don't remember exactly, but probably about a month later as well.
And in that process, if you went down the traditional route, you would have an editor and you'd be getting proofs and going, all of that sort of process. Did you show your work to other people? Did you hire an editor, anything like that?
I did, yeah. I actually paid a lot for my first editor because I wasn't aware of kind of all the options that were out there. And she did a fantastic job. She was worth it. It was just too heavy for my budget at the time because I was just getting started. So I paid quite a lot for book 1, and then I realized I can't sustain this at this point in my career. So then I switched to another editor for books 2 and 3. And it all went really well. Those books went through at least 3 cycles of editing. Usually I go through a developmental edit just with the story part of it. Mm-hmm. And then I go through 2 rounds of copy editing. But through launching those stories, I found a reader who was really passionate about my work. And she is also wanting to start her editorial career. So we made an agreement that worked for both of us, where she was able to provide editorial services at a savings, and she was able to get my books before anyone else. And
brilliant.
Yeah, and she's really great with helping me, making sure there's not too many, plot holes or anything that's glaring. She's very nitpicky. She's known as Nitpicker. So it worked out. I mean, once you get started and there's people that can see that you're producing work regularly and they like your stuff, and there's opportunities for you to, work with those people.
And So if the first book comes out in December 2016, it's fair to say you've been pretty prolific since then, because looking at your website, you've got a lot of books out. How many is it now?
I've wrote a lot of books. I have now, 19 titles.
Wow, that's incredible in such a short space of time.
It is, but there's caveat. There are some of them that are novellas. I think there's 4 novellas. The rest are full-length novels. And I also had that 1 year ahead of time where I wrote for 3 years, for a year, got those 3 books ready. And then also my first year and a half, I wrote a lot. I basically had no life, and I wrote a ton. And I suffered from TOS because of that. I don't know if you know what TOS is. It's called thoracic outlet syndrome, and it's when the muscles in the shoulders and neck and chest tighten up because you're always doing this.
All right.
And then I was getting aching feelings in my arm. My arms were tingling, going numb at night. I was like, this isn't sustainable. I can't do this. So I slowed down.
I mean, how fast were you writing? Sorry, how much were you writing at that point to get that kind of injury?
There was my best day was best. I can't even say it was best day because it was a terrible idea. But 13,000 words.
Wow.
was my biggest day. But I now do 2,000 words a day, and I try not to do too much more than that, because even if I'm on a roll and I feel like I can, I don't, just because I pay for it physically.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And if you want to do this long term and make a career out of it, then you really have to take care of your body. And I have a few author colleagues who are really suffering as well and have to slow down, not because they've chosen to, but because their bodies have told them you have to.
Yeah.
So what is your process? Like, how much time do you spend planning out a book, or do you like plot out every detail, or do you sort of have a rough outline and then find out where it goes as you're writing it?
I don't do massive detail, but I at least have an outline for each chapter, like basically just a paragraph for each chapter, so I know all of the major beats. And then stuff inevitably happens when you're writing, where you all of a sudden things open up and you all of a sudden have something that you can tug on that you wasn't there before. That's really interesting. So I like to keep a bit of flexibility, but I always know how it's going to end. I generally don't start writing until I know the climax and the ending.
Right.
Because if I don't have that, then I get lost and I get frustrated and end up wasting time, wasting words.
Mm-hmm.
So, and when it comes to like writing a series, I can start book 1 and have that book 1 outline done, and I'll be working on outline 2 and 3 while I'm doing my word count, so that there's always momentum happening.
And I think I read somewhere that you tend to write like a kind of jigsaw, and you'll do not necessarily you won't write it in from chapter 1 to chapter 12 or whatever. You'll do bits about it, and you'll kind of work out where it fits in after.
Do pack work. Once I have that outline and I have a blurb for each chapter, some chapters I'm really excited about writing, and I have a very clear idea of what it looks like. And so I'll just dive straight to those chapters and I'll skip everything else. And then it's like building a quilt. Mm-hmm. I'll just jump around and go to the areas that I see most clearly. And other times I'll write linearly just because it starts to come out that way. But I'm a big fan of kind of jumping around, because I started writing linearly, starting with chapter 1. And what I learned was that by the time I got to the end of my book, I had to rewrite the first few chapters because so many things had changed that the beginning didn't work anymore.
Yeah.
So I like to go to the more like pivotal scenes and kind of get those out and know what are the little bits that I have to plant early in the book that I wasn't aware of when I just wrote the outline.
And then presumably you can fix any inconsistencies in the edit at the edit stage of that. Yeah, I actually find it easier if I don't write in a straight line. I end up getting it done faster and writing a better chapter 1 and 2 and entry to the story. And do you find the 2,000 words a day, is it always easy, or are you do you suffer from writer's block and things like that sometimes? No, I don't suffer from writer's block. I'm one of those people that doesn't totally understand that term. I have so many stories and so many like wild imaginings that I don't think I tell my readers that I have enough story ideas to keep me writing for 10 years. Literally. There's so many that I feel drowned by them sometimes. But in terms of sitting down and actually getting the word count out, yes, sometimes it's a struggle. If I haven't slept well, if I'm tired, or if I'm emotionally, drained or distracted by something else going on, I do find it hard to get into the story. But in that case, I usually say to myself, okay, don't go for 2,000 words, go for 500 words. You can do that.
And when I start writing the 500 words, I find that it just, once it's like turning on the faucet, then it just comes, and I more often than not can hit my word count.
Yeah, I think it was Stephen King said on writing, it's something about some days it's like trying to start up a really old car, and it takes a while to get going, but once it's going, it'll run beautifully, and it's that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's totally like that. It's like you just have to just take the first step, and then it gets easier.
And how do you keep track of all your ideas then? So you've got all these ideas coming at you, but you're in the middle of writing this book. So do you write them all down somewhere and go back to them later on, or what?
If it's a good idea, it usually doesn't leave me and I don't have to write it down. But once it gets to a point where I'm like, okay, I remember this story idea that I had when I was 16, and I have to actually turn it into something that's not just a dream. Then I start to I use things like Evernote. I use Post-it notes, sticky notes, and I plaster them all over the wall. I take photos of those. I'm going to try a couple of different things. There's some softwares like Aeon, which is timeline, like chronology, like something like what you guys have invented with the notebook is fantastic. My desk is kind of messy with notes everywhere, and I have like a stack of, let's see, 8 notebooks here right now, and they're all partially filled in. So I'm not the most organized person in the world, but once it comes to actually getting that story to a place where I can use it, I actually use Excel because I can put my what's it called? My outline, my book outline, the beats that I like to hit on one side, and then fill in all of the scenes in kind of that patchwork way. And I find that once I have that all filled in and those questions answered, then it's really easy to start writing. And
do you like to finish a book before you'll show it to anyone else, or do you share bits of it with other people as you're writing it? My first drafts, I think maybe all writers feel this way, but my first drafts really suck. So
Absolutely.
I know that they do. And so usually my developmental editor, Nicola, is the only one who sees my first drafts. And she's hard on me, but she's also forgiving because she understands their first draft. And, when she sends me back my feedback, and I've gone through it all and I've made those changes, I start to feel a little better about the book. And I feel like that's kind of a normal process because your first draft is kind of supposed to suck.
So, how many drafts do you tend to do then before you think, I think it's probably about ready? 3
solid drafts, but I don't rewrite a lot. I will spit out the first draft and then do a developmental edit and just kind of make sure that the story makes sense. And then I'll send it to a copy editor who will catch line editing and anything that's too kind of messy and clean that up. And then I'll let it sit for a bit and read it over one more time. And usually stuff comes out. I find that period of letting something sit, I didn't really have the luxury of that in the first couple of years of my career because I was just trying to get these launches out. But now I do. And I think it's really valuable because you will come back to your own work, at least I find, and go, I don't understand what I was thinking when I read that. And obviously my readers aren't going to get it either. So
I think that, especially when you're self-published, actually, there's a discipline in saying, this is it, finished. Because I know personally, as Tarek will attest, I'm very bad at having finished something, supposedly, but then I keep going back to it. I can't leave it alone. And I suppose if in the traditional publishing route, you'd have someone saying, no, this is it, this is what you need to do, here's your notes, do that. But if you're self-published, you have to be a bit more disciplined and say to yourself, no, and have more confidence, I suppose, to say, this is it, this is finished.
This is as good as I can make it right now, and no, that's hard to know when to stop.
Yes. I have to pass the red face test. By the time I read it over one more time, before publishing, if I'm feeling red-faced about anything, then I'll go oh, that's really bad writing.
That's good. I'm going to adopt that one.
I find if I read it out loud, I catch so much more than if I just read it in my head.
Oh my gosh, you're so right. I recently started doing that because I went to a recording studio and did a recording test just to see if I could tell my own stories for audio because I'm bringing out another trilogy into audio. And I'm like, this is a good chance to try it and see if I like it. And I started reading a book that hadn't been prepared for audio. And I was like, oh man, I got to edit this book again. Because when you read it out loud, it does. All this stuff jumps out at you. Like, this doesn't read as smoothly as it does in my head. So I think that's really critical.
How do they change it for audiobook? What kind of changes do they make for that?
Well, the book, I actually have it right here, Salt and Stone.
Nice.
I've got this like flag in it now, and it's full of like red marker stains, because I started reading it out loud to myself just to see if I could read the story and, tell it in a nice way. And I just kept stumbling over a few things and thinking, just a few changes here and there would make this so much smoother. Mm-hmm. And there's a rhythm that happens. Like, there's a lyricism to reading a story out loud that you just don't get when you read it in your head. Mm-hmm. And I think once you start crossing over into the audiobook realm, it forces you to take that next step and become even more critical of your own stuff and make things even tighter.
I think especially with dialogue, that's true, because when you say that out loud, you suddenly realise sometimes no human being would ever talk like that.
But I find that such a hard thing, because, as you say, it's never as anyone talks, but you're not trying to write super realistic. It's a kind of weird halfway house of interesting, fun stuff to read that's smarter than anyone exists in real life and is wittier, but not too witty. And I really struggle with that stuff.
Yeah, it is hard to know what sounds realistic and what's just hokey. I know. I think that's something you find for yourself in your own writing, like it's part of your voice. Because I have a co-author and his writing is so dramatic. When I read it, I'm like, wow, like reads like a soap opera. But it sounds good, like, because it's his story and it works for his style. But for me, I'm so much more understated, and to bring our styles together was such a big challenge.
And how does that work, writing with someone else? So do you do a chapter each, or?
I was trying, I needed to produce this spin-off story in a timely manner. And I just found that I couldn't write fast enough and keep the project that I had on my, at a rate that I was happy with. And I had this author, Aaron D. Schneider, that I had published a series of his work 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. And I also worked with him for some combat scenes, because I don't know anything about combat. And I wrote a series for Michael Anderle's universe, the Orosarian universe, and it had aerial combat scenes and like swordplay and stuff, and I was clueless. So I went on Upwork and I found this fellow who was, he was great with military sci-fi, and he was great with fight choreography in writing and stuff. And so I asked him to help me out with these scenes in this other series, and he did a great job. I really loved his stuff. And so we got on the phone together, and I was like, well, what's your goal? What's your deal? And he's like, oh, being a full-time writer is my dream. And so I was like, well, I have a little indie publishing house. Why don't we work together? And so he wrote this 3-book series, and that's out in the world now. And then I was working on this other series, book 1, it's called Born of Metal. It's a spin-off character from the Elemental stories. And I thought of him because style really suited the high combat, high tense story that it was. So I was like, well, why don't we work together for this? I've got a rough outline. Go in and, let me know what you think of it. So we worked together to get the outline to a place where we were happy, and I was happy that it would mesh with the world that I'd already created. And then I gave him his head on the first draft, and I basically came in after him as he was writing it, and did a lot of editing, and I added certain scenes, and, just basically we worked together one after the other going through the manuscript. And it turned out, I think, pretty well. So, yeah, it was interesting.
Excellent. Yeah, no, we've spoken to a few people, haven't we, that have co-written, and everyone seems to have a different approach.
Yeah, some folk did like a chapter each, or one wrote a chapter, then redrafted it and went back and forth. Or
I think that can work if your voices sound really similar.
Yeah, because we spoke to Tim Leben, who was saying that he and Chris Golden did a series of books, and one of them would focus on the kind of world, one would focus on the kind of smaller parts of it,
the characters. Yeah. Tim said he loved the world building aspect of things, and Chris was
that would work really well, actually.
Focused on the characters,
And why not use your strengths and the things that interest you the most?
Yeah, exactly.
Focus on that.
And so all of your books, I think I'm right in saying that all of your books are that sort of young adult urban fantasy genre. Is that right?
Yeah. They are dominant, but Michael Anderle would tell you that the series he published is more epic fantasy than urban. It's kind of packaged like an urban fantasy story, but it reads a bit more like an epic fantasy story.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
But is that the sort of stuff that you read, or do you read across?
I read everything. Well, I shouldn't say everything. I read a lot of things. I read. I love Stephen King. I know lots of people do. I don't actually like horror, but I love his prose. I love his writing style, and I learn so much when I read him. And I read nonfiction, and I read pop fiction, and I read other, fellow indie fantasy stuff, and whatever strikes me at the moment, I'll pick up and read. I'm just about to start Ryan Scow's post-apocalyptic Age of Exodus story, and I'm a bit scared because I've read his stuff before and it's very intense. And but yeah, I'll read everything and anything, and that would be my advice. Actually, is even if you're not sure you might be attracted to a certain genre, give it a try. If it repels you, fine, but you might learn something that surprises you.
Well, I have to admit that for years I avoided Stephen King because I'm not a horror fan, and then suddenly I read one of his books and was blown away. It's so much more than what you would think of as horror. Yeah. It's amazing.
Yeah, there's a book club at work, and they were asking for ideas for the books, and I said 11/22/63 is a great book, and everybody was like, "Oh, Stephen King," no. And it went on the list, and the number of people that said it was not what they expected. It was brilliant. It was it was a crazy, really, really well written story, bittersweet ending, blah blah blah. And he is very surprising to people who expect horror.
I couldn't put that book down, and there were several of his that were like that. I can't face the hardcore horror. I haven't read it because I think it's but I read everything else that's kind of under the hardcore horror, and I feel like because I get so much out of it as a writer.
So if we sort of jump right back to the start, I suppose, and you published the book in December 2016, and how did you? You were talking about you merged the writing with your marketing. What did you do to make that a success? How did you do on the marketing side of things?
So in 2016, well, I guess this would have been the early 2017 that I was doing this. Things changed so fast in this industry, but I feel like you could probably still do this and be successful. So I had published one, and book 2 was done and ready to go, but I didn't publish it on Amazon. I actually put it up on Insta-Freebie. It was called Insta-Freebie at the time. Is it still called? I think it's called Prolific Works now.
Right.
And I gave it away for 2 weeks, and I didn't advertise it or anything. I put it into these free kind of group promotions, and I ended up getting 2,000 people on my email list and downloading Born of Fire.
Wow.
And so when I published Born of Fire, I took it off of Insta-Freebie, published it on Amazon, and then I sent those 2,000 people the link to Born of Water and said, hey, did you like Born of Fire? Then you'll love Born of Water. And my sales literally went from this itty bitty bump to just this massive sudden spike.
Brilliant.
And
that's fantastic.
Yeah, it was amazing. I was watching it going, whoa, what happened? But it worked. So lucky me. And when you first start out, you're like, I have no idea what I'm doing. This works. And so that got my newsletter list started, and I kind of just carried on from there. And I used a lot for the first year. I did no AMS ads. I did no Facebook ads. All I did was third-party promotions, basically either swaps with other authors or paid features in places like Book Gorilla, and there's a gazillion of those out there. And that got me through my first year. And actually, my goal once I launched financially was to surpass my income working in the corporate world. Yeah. And I managed to do that just using those platforms.
Wow.
So.
And how long did it take you to be able to say, yeah, I can make a living off this? This is.
I would say by my 5th month.
Cool. That's fantastic.
It was, it actually it happened fast, but then the first time you start to see a downturn, you kind of have this little panic.
It's over.
It's all over.
Were you selling the books at sort of a cheap price, or were they sort of standard price?
My first book has almost always been 99 cents. I did do a short experiment with it at $3.99. And it did okay, but what I found was that once I started advertising, your conversion goes way down when you're selling a book for $3.99. You're putting money behind it. So I put it back to 99 cents, and it made money anyways because it's my longest. It's 93,000 words. So it's a fairly long book. So it makes a lot in Kindle Unlimited.
Right.
And then I charge $3.99 for the rest of the books in the series, and $4.99 for the spin-off series that are. So there's like the 6 books from the main series, and now each of those characters is getting their own trilogy.
Right. Okay.
So those trilogies are $4.99 each.
So for Kindle Unlimited stuff, for the listeners out there who might be wondering about whether that's something to go into or not, could you give us a bit about how that worked and what your thoughts on it were?
Yeah, it's basically well, from the reader perspective, if you are a big reader, I think it's $10. Sorry, I'm not in pounds. I don't know what it is in pounds.
I think it's $7.99.
That is,
$7.99.
Okay. A month. It's kind of like Netflix. So you pay this monthly fee, and then anything that's registered in that Kindle Unlimited program, you get to pull off the shelf and read it without any charge. And for authors, it's great for certain genres because there are a lot of certain genres that are in Kindle Unlimited, like young adult is one of them, because I think parents buy their teenagers a membership, or I don't know, it just tends to be one of those genres that is high readership in Kindle Unlimited. Mm-hmm. And you get, if you register your book, it's a 90-day period where it's registered, and you can basically tick a little box that has it continually register, so you don't have to keep re-registering it if you want to keep your book in it.
Okay.
And you get paid per page, but you also get paid by purchases for people who are not in Kindle Unlimited. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
I definitely recommend it for certain genres, but I would just say do your research and make sure that your genre belongs in there.
So I suppose the longer the book, then the more potential you have of making money off it, because you get paid by the page, etc.
Yeah. The one thing I like about it is that if your writing isn't good, it doesn't hook the reader, they'll look back and you won't get paid. So there's a motivation to produce stories that are really good quality.
Yeah.
And I like that about the program. There's lots of criticisms on the program too. And I think it's just one of those things that's personal to you, and you have to decide when you launch if you're going to go wide and pursue that, or go all in with Kindle Unlimited and just keep filling those, hungry readers that way.
I mean, I think there's probably not a perfect system out there, whether it's traditional publishing or doing it yourself in Kindle, etc. But I think, as you say, it's all about working out what suits you best, and what are the downsides you can live with, or don't really apply to you as much, etc.
Yeah, totally. And even if you are still thinking, after you learn about this, you're thinking that you'd rather go trad, I don't have anything bad to say about that either, because I've never gone down that road, and I know it works fine for a lot of authors, and they like having the support team, and they don't want to think about the marketing. So that again is another kind of author that you can make that choice.
Would you want, if a traditional publisher came to you, would you be interested or not?
It would be tough to say yes, I think.
Yeah.
It's tough to lose control of my own series. Like if it was a one-off book, and they were willing to put some marketing juice behind it, then I would consider it. But I'm like kind of 70-ish%, I'd probably say no to most offers.
Yeah.
Because the royalty split, it doesn't make sense. I mean, you might make 5 to 7% as a rookie traditionally pubbed author. And if your book doesn't do well, they're not really that motivated to keep publishing your stuff. I mean, they put their marketing budgets toward the big names like the Dan Browns and the Stephen Kings, because they're a sure thing. So it is kind of up to you to a certain degree anyways to get your book out there in front of readers. And that's, if you're going to be doing that work, then you might as well take 70%.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's actually quite an interesting way of saying it, because I think you're right. There's so many folk go down the traditional route and I suppose see their book go out there to die on shelves when if there's not a big push behind it. It's hard. There's so many books out there making impact. It's difficult.
But I think there's also, there definitely is still a degree of snobbery, I suppose, between,
absolutely.
If you're not a traditionally published author, then you're not an author in the eyes of some of these people,
I think that'll take a bit of time to change, but it will change. It has to, because in the landscape that we're looking at now, I mean, there are indies who are making incredible money doing this. And telling great stories. And I know personally quite a few trad authors who've left traditional and actually gone to indie.
Yeah. John Grisham, I'm sure his latest book, he went straight to the readers himself. He sold it, directly, did it because he said, well, why should I'm a big enough name now, why do I need to give 70% of my royalties away? Which makes sense. I can totally see that. Yeah.
It does make sense. And it's a big disruptor for this industry. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see how it plays out over the next decade.
But you also have your own. You are also a publisher. Do you publish other books as well, not just your own?
I did publish Aaron's trilogy. Because I really I believed in his talent, and I wanted to see if I could, help him towards his goal. But it was really challenging because it was a different genre, totally than mine. It's still fantasy, but it was military sci-fi and. Well, actually more like a military epic fantasy mash. And his readers are totally different. It's not like there's not a lot of crossover. So it was kind of starting from scratch. And what I found was that being an indie author and producing regularly, this is my full-time job, is so demanding already that it was like starting a pen name and juggling these two brands.
Yeah.
And I feel like it was a really interesting experiment, but I probably wouldn't do it again. I would want to pass Aaron over to somebody like Michael Anderle, for example, who has that machine going and has a team of people that can, does the marketing side of it so that he can write. And
And going forward, what's next for you?
Oh man, I've been in such a so timely that you should ask that. I've been in such a royal this week. Like I started an audiobook review team, and that's requiring a lot of admin time, and I'm really excited about audio, but it is taking away from my writing time. So I think I'm going to have to look into getting a PA. And I just started making kind of a job description and looking at all the things that I could pass on to a second person. And there's a lot there. So that'll probably be my next step. And just allowing me to continue to write, keep my focus on the story rather than getting distracted by all these kind of day-to-day things. There's things that I probably won't necessarily let go of anytime soon, like Facebook ads. I did hire a team last year and earlier this year, and they did a great job, but it was very expensive. Yeah. And I also felt like at the end of a promotion, I still didn't know what happened, and I didn't know what worked. And so I took a course, and two courses actually, and I started doing them myself, and I started feeling better because I don't like feeling like I don't know what's going on. B, I have no control. And I mean, at least you feel like you have a little bit of control if you're in that dashboard trying to figure it out yourself, even if it is confusing. And if you do it for a year and you feel like you understand it a little bit better, then maybe at that point it's good to pass it off to somebody else. But for now, I'm going to keep honing my skills at that.
This is purely something that we encountered when we were doing our Facebook ads for the notebook. But what struck us was, social media is great for as some things, and obviously it does work. Facebook ads definitely bring you in revenue. But there's also a subset of people that seem to just want to comment to pull down whatever it is that's there, do you get that as well in your ads as well?
For sure, yeah. I don't get that many. I mostly get lots of positive comments, but I do get the odd negative comment. And in the beginning, I try to reason with that person and, or whatever. And I realized quickly that they don't actually care what your reason is. They just thrive on negativity for whatever reason is going on in their own life. So I just delete them. I don't even respond.
That's the way to do it.
We came to that. Yeah, we did exactly that. I kept trying to engage with them, and then I was like, why am I wasting my time?
They just want to push a button. They just want a reaction. They don't care about making a point or
it's so not personal. It's more about that whatever's going on with them.
So is there any kind of interest for you writing anything other than books? Would you go into screenplays or?
I did write a screenplay a couple of years ago. I have a friend who's a screenwriter in LA. He was actually nominated for an Oscar for Gorillas in the Mist.
Oh, wow. Cool.
He's a friend of mine because we lived in the same small town in the Rockies and used to get together and talk writing, and he's brilliant. And so I wrote a screenplay before I started writing these books and sent it to him to look at. And what I realized after talking with him is that I would love that. And in fact, my mom, she always says, you wrote nothing but dialogue when you were a kid. You should just be writing screenplays. But I would find that when you pass off your screenplay to the team that's going to be creating it, this is feedback from Tab, it ends up being quite different from what you created in the first place, because there's a big group of people who come together to make something like that come to life. And, by the time you actually see it on the big screen, it's not necessarily your vision anymore. It's a bunch of other people's vision too. And hopefully they've done it justice. But a lot more often than not, it's not always the case. And Tabs worked with Disney, like he wrote like Tarzan and Brother Bear and Atlantis and all those films. And he's proud of them and he did fantastic work. And I'm like, oh, this one scene, I really loved it. And he's like, yeah, I didn't write that. So I think it's just a different creative process, and you have to have a really thick skin, even thicker than writing novels, and be willing to kind of let everybody else have a go at it, because there's professionals that know what's going to sell, as a TV series or a movie, whatever it is you're making. You don't necessarily know. So, yeah.
And I suppose going from someone like yourself, who you've got complete control over everything, from writing it to when it goes out, it's, you're not going through a publisher, you're doing it all yourself. So it's your own project, your own baby. Yeah. Handing that over to someone else to change, I could see that being quite a difference. Yeah.
That would be hard if you're really attached to it, I think. Exactly.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think it is a business, right? You produce ideas, produce a screenplay, you hope it sells, it might get optioned and then, never made. And is that going to break your heart, or are you okay? You're going to come up with another idea and keep trying. And so a different kind of mentality, I think, in creation. Yeah.
But if HBO phoned you up tomorrow and said, we want to make Elementals into a TV series.
Oh, I'm so excited. I'm just so excited. If you look at my Facebook ads, the comment that is said the most is, please make a movie. And I'm just like, I wish I had that control. I don't.
And do you have any plans to do something out with that sort of universe entirely, a completely different genre?
Yeah. Oh man, I have so many ideas. I would love to write that dystopian story that I was started like all those years ago. I want to write 2 more spin-off stories in more of an epic fantasy realm. I recently went through the whole Game of Thrones series and I loved it, and it inspired me to, start planning an epic fantasy. I don't know what is all going to happen, but I think what I'm going to end up doing is writing these spin-off character stories for probably the next 5 years. Because I have this character from the Siren's Curse, actually 2 characters from the Siren's Curse series. There's a 5-book series and a 3-book series, 2 separate characters. And I really reasonably can bring about 6 books out a year without killing myself. So probably I'm kind of slotted for the next 5 years, and all these other ideas that I have, I'm just going to have to table them for now and hope that I can get to them one day.
6 books a year, that's incredible.
That's something to aspire to, definitely. We like to end each podcast with a couple of things. First of all, just to ask you quickly, what was the last book you read?
Oh, the last book I read was Carrie.
Oh,
okay.
Nice.
Excellent. Good one.
Yeah. I read it in like 2 days.
I've never read Carrie, actually. I should read it.
Oh, it's excellent.
I love the film.
His first published work. It's so good. It's very, like in line with his earlier stuff. I don't know if you've read Cujo or Salem's Lot or Pet Cemetery, but they're sad. They're a bit sad, but they're very good. I would highly recommend it. And actually, to all of those readers out there, there's all the listeners out there and aspiring writers, read The Body by Stephen King.
Okay.
It's the story that became Stand By Me.
Yeah.
It's phenomenal. I've read it 6 times and I learn something new every time I read it. And it's short, so it won't take long for you to read it.
Excellent. Good advice. And the other thing we like to do at the end of a podcast is do very quick fire questions. So it's a sort of one or the other thing. So Star Wars or Star Trek?
Star Wars.
Maze Runner or Hunger Games?
Ooh, Hunger Games.
TV or cinema?
10 years ago it would have been cinema. Now it's TV.
TV always wins in this
Yeah,
one.
I know.
Yeah.
And last one, fancy restaurant or takeaway?
Oh gosh. I married the biggest foodie in the world, so I have to say fancy restaurant.
Abby-Lynn Knorr.
Yeah, really good to chat to her.
Yeah.
I thought it was a really interesting chat.
Yeah, she's
actually.
really, really nice to chat to. Some really interesting advice on people who are wanting to go down the Amazon Kindle store route.
Yeah, self-publishing. I mean, she just had that confidence to just go for it. Didn't even consider traditional publishing, but she's made a huge success of it. And it was really interesting hearing all the different methods that she used to make sure it was a success, including that idea of sort of publishing those first few books within a couple of months of each other, but they were all a route into her series. You could pick up any one that you wanted.
Like the Avengers almost.
Yeah, that's right. Sort of building the team.
Exactly, and then you read that final book at the end.
Yeah. No, so it was really good. And if you're into urban fantasy, do check out her books. We'll put a link to her website, which has where you can buy all her books, or you can get them on the Amazon Kindle, etc. But we'll put a link to her website in the bio. We'll also put all the links to the various sites that she mentioned there, regarding how she was able to market and get.
Because of course, if you're the big thing about doing it yourself is you have to do it yourself. The marketing is important, and I think it's interesting that if you do it yourself, then the number of books, having that group of books in a short space of time, I think that's a quite important thing to grab your audience. Yeah,
I think you've definitely got to keep giving them new content.
Yeah, absolutely.
To keep their attention. And then it shows that Abby's built up a good following
19 books in 3 years.
19 books in 3 years is quite a rate, but it works for her. And
absolutely. She's done fantastically from it.
So thanks again to Abby for coming on the podcast.
Yeah.
Who have we got on next week?
Next week we have Christopher Golden.
Yeah, Chris was kind enough to speak to us about his writing career, which includes horror books, fantasy books, young adult books, comics,
tie-ins,
movie tie-ins, anthologies. He's
done everything.
Yeah, he's another person that's written a lot of stuff. But he was again someone that gave us a lot of useful information about how to try and break in.
Yeah,
I mean, I suppose if I had to sum it up in one word, it would be hustle. That's the sneak preview for next week's podcast. But do tune in because it's a really good one, and we had a really fun chat with Chris.
Yeah.
Before we go, we'd also like to say that obviously this podcast is free. It's something that Tarek and I do in our spare time, and we do mention the Page One notebook quite a lot, which is the notebook we made for writers. That helps support the podcast. So if you are interested in writing, then please do check it out. The link to our website is in the bio.
Yep.
There is an offer on this month to celebrate the launch of season 2 of the podcast. It's Pod 10, POD10. If you enter that when you add the notebook to the cart and check out, then you'll get a discount of 10% on your notebook. So please do check that out. And please also be sure to tell anyone you know that likes writing or likes listening to authors or screenwriters, etc.
Spread the word.
Yeah. Tell them about the podcast. Please rate us. Please subscribe, follow. All of that helps us boost up the ratings. We want to get this podcast out as wide as possible because that helps us find new people to speak to and keep recording these episodes for you.
Yeah. As Marco says, the Page One notebook is really there to help support the podcast. We couldn't do it without you guys. If you are a fan of it, please do tell your friends. Yeah, no, we really appreciate your support. And as always, thanks to Simon Stokes for his audio assistance. If you would like to get in touch with us, you can send us an email to podcast@rightgear.co.uk or send us a tweet to @right_gear. And we'll just leave you with an advert for the Page One notebook, and we'll see you next week. See you later. The blank page. To some, it's terrifying, an obstacle to overcome. But we prefer to think of it as an opportunity, a blank canvas to be filled with all of the adventures and characters in our head. So how to overcome that fear?
Well, we all know the best advice for a writer is write. Seriously, get words on the page and more will follow.
But what about later, when you start trying to pull those threads of what you've written together? What about the character you wrote about way back at the start? Who was she again? What was she carrying? And where did she leave the MacGuffin that she now really needs in the third act? Think about all those top thrillers you like to read, or that amazing drama you just watched. What did they all have in common? Structure and planning.
As aspiring writers ourselves, we've tried many different methods to try and organise all the thoughts about the stories we want to tell. We've been there searching for a piece of scrap paper to note something down, or making a quick note on our phone in between meetings.
Or sometimes we'll make a note in whatever notebook we're carrying, or a document on our laptop so we don't forget that great idea. Let's be honest, it can all be a bit messy and it's easy to lose track of everything. And that's when we realised it's not just the story that needs structure and planning, but the way we gather all of our thoughts about it as well.
And so we made Page One. Page One is more than just another notebook. It's a place to put down all your ideas for your latest project, divided into easy-to-use sections that will help you plan your story, so that when that blank page comes calling, you're ready to answer. And then afterwards, once it's written, we realised you need to plan how to let people read it, so we included a section relating to submissions.
Each one is designed for one project, whether you want to write a book, screenplay, a comic, or any other kind of story. We truly believe that when you use it, it will help you get to the main event, writing your story. So we hope this helps.
We can't wait to read what you come up with.
And remember, every story starts with page one.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, please leave a comment down below, hit that thumbs up button, and be sure to hit that subscribe button as well so you never miss an episode like these ones below.
And if you want to get in touch, you can always drop us a tweet in the Twitter machine, which is at UKPage1, as evidenced here, and our other social media channels are available.
Otherwise, we hope to see you next episode.
See you later.